Welcome to Jaipur, India. Today I took the new GMAT Focus edition at... No, not there. There. Sakar Ajitesh, the only GMAT test center in the city. Today was launch day for the new GMAT Focus edition, and I knew that I had to take it as soon as possible so that I could give my students a better idea about the new exam. I hope my experience can help you as well. Okay, let's dive right in. I arrived at the test center 30 minutes before start time. The sign-in process went smoothly, and I checked both my markers to make sure that they were working properly before starting the test. Now, the first thing the Focus Edition shows you is a couple of untimed identity confirmation and terms and conditions screens. Now remember, these screens are untimed, so you can use them to settle down a bit if you want. I just wanted to start the test, so I clicked the radio button to confirm my identity and then accepted the terms and conditions. The test then moved on to a set of instruction screens. Now, unlike the previous screens, these instruction screens were timed. A total of 2 minutes for all of them combined. Again, I just clicked through all of these instruction screens quickly instead of letting the section time out. I was now in the final section before the start of the test. This final section is a 1-minute timed section order select screen. Let's spend a minute on this one. I had, at least initially, planned to choose the verbal Quant DI order, because I just couldn't wait to get a look at the new verbal section. However, I had also just recovered from a fever, and I wasn't feeling 100%. So I changed my section order at the last moment to Quant DI verbal. I thought that verbal at the end would be good for me because that's my strongest section by far. I'm actually glad I made this change because something completely unexpected happened a little later in my test. Okay, so after I confirmed my section order, my test started. Now, I didn't try to execute any fancy algorithm gaming strategies. I just started answering the questions one by one. As far as I can tell, the difficulty level ramped up pretty quickly. If I felt that the question was tough or that it would take too much time, I bookmarked it, marked an answer, and moved on. I think this was a mistake. And I'll tell you why in a bit. Anyway, by the time I finished the first 10 questions, I had already bookmarked 3 questions. This was a worrying sign as I couldn't change more than 3 answers even if I wanted to. After that, I made sure that I solved through all the remaining questions to the best of my ability. I finished the section with around 4 minutes left on the clock and immediately went to the review screen to do the first question I had bookmarked. Now at that point, I found that I couldn't remember the question well, couldn't remember how I'd been planning to attack it, and I couldn't find my workings and my notepad quickly enough. This is where I made a big mistake. Instead of using my 4 minutes to solve 1 or 2 questions properly, I just switched between all 3 bookmarked questions, and eventually I managed to do none of them. Now, I strongly recommend that you watch out for this. Be aware that if you keep switching between bookmarked questions, you can easily end up wasting whatever time you had left. Instead, try to focus on just 1 question at a time. Now, at this point, I realized that I was a little tired. I decided to let the Quant section time out to just rest a little bit. This is where I made my second mistake. Once the Quant section timed out, a new timed screen came up asking me if I wanted to take a break. The screen gave me 30 seconds to make my choice. I thought I'd let this screen time out as well. But what I had forgotten is that the default timeout decision for this screen is to start the break. When I looked up, I saw that the break had already started. Now, as a verbal instructor, verbal is the most important section for me, and I had been counting on getting a break for a little rest before I took the verbal section. But because I didn't continue the test, I was forced to take a break after the very first section, and the GMAT Focus Edition has only 1 break. Anyway, so I wasn't expecting to have to take my break so early, so when I left the testing room, I immediately headed to the washroom to just splash some water on my face. Anything to prep myself for the next block because I knew that the next block would be 90 minutes non-stop. I'm glad I did this because I think I wasn't in the right headspace at that point. Okay, so after the break, I worked my way through the DI section. I was looking for a few things in the DI section. Firstly, I did see a few verbal DS questions, so that's confirmed. Verbal DS is this new kind of data sufficiency that doesn't have any maths. It's like a critical reasoning question in a data sufficiency format. Now, I don't know whether these new questions were experimental or not, but I got a roughly even split between Quant and Verbal DS. Secondly, I remember getting an MSR with lots of information and a lot of graphs. After spending a lot of time reading the initial wall of text, I decided to just do a good enough job on the 3 questions that were associated with that MSR, instead of trying to get all of them correct. Frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if I ended up getting all of them wrong. Okay, let's move on to the third point. I did not get any calculation-heavy questions. I ended up using the calculator for just one question, and that was more to see just what the calculator looked like than because I actually needed it. Of course, if you need to do any calculations on your test, please remember that you can use a calculator during DI. By the time I finished DI, I was feeling much better, and I was actively looking forward to the verbal section. I didn't even wait for the 30-second screen to time out. I just hit end section to get to verbal ASAP. Now, the verbal section started off with a pretty easy CR question, but I did start getting some tough questions after the first few. The biggest issue I faced was that I got 4 RC passages, 2 medium and 2 long. Now, I've been reviewing some focus practice tests with my students, and this is different from what I've seen in their tests. Most of my students who took the official GMAT Focus practice tests got some short and some medium length passages. Now, my reading speed is only slightly faster than average, so I'm pretty sure that this affected my timing on the verbal section. Thankfully, I got one boldface question towards the end. Now, I love boldface because there's no logic that you have to apply. You just have to identify what the different parts of the argument are doing and just mark the option which says the same thing. So, I ended up solving that boldface question in less than 20 seconds. Now, by the time I reached the last few questions, I was very sure that my verbal section was going really well. I was also well ahead of time. So, when I found myself choosing between 2 options on a question, I decided to mark the option that I was less confident about so that I could come back and take a final call during review. Once I finished the verbal section, I went back to that one question and read the entire RC passage again to confirm that my preferred option was in fact the better choice. I then changed my answer to the one I thought was correct and confirmed my selection on the pop-up screen. Now, my verbal score almost certainly means that I got every question correct on the verbal section. So the change that I made using the review and edit feature most likely went in my favor. I'll know for sure when I get my ESR. Now, as far as overall time management is concerned, I finished my verbal section with only 4 minutes left, which is very different from my normal timing. On the old GMAT, I'd regularly finish with at least 20 minutes left, but that may have been because I was really fast at SC. The bottom line is that I'm a little concerned about what this means for my students. RC and CR involve much more reading than SC. So for now, I'm letting everyone know that they should be prepared for more time pressure on the verbal section of this new Focus edition. Okay, let's summarize. These are my main observations. Verbal feels like the current GMAT in terms of question quality and difficulty. In terms of timing, it may be a little tougher. GMAT has increased average time a bit, but not enough to offset the removal of SC, at least in my opinion. Next, I did not see any geometry in Quant. But although I did make an effort to analyze my verbal questions, I didn't do anything like that in Quant. I'll be following the experiences of my fellow instructors and test takers like you to get more information about Quant. And finally, if you're looking to do well on DI, make sure that you spend enough time on DS. Otherwise, DS can absolutely throw your timing off. Also, just remember that you can get these new verbal DS questions. Okay, so that was my first GMAT Focus edition. It was the very first appointment I could find across 4 Indian cities. I hope I was able to answer some of your questions. Feel free to ask any other questions you may have in the comments below.